Okay, so I'm going to be discussing my treatment with the Stiles family. I recently received a referral for the Stiles family after Reva Devereaux had called reporting some concerns with her son's well-being after his friend had been shot and murdered in their neighborhood. So the Stiles family came to me shortly after that. Initially, the first session, Trey and Furious were fairly reluctant to enter the services. They had been fairly reserved. Reva appeared to be the more dominant figure in the family initially. She spoke about some issues with her feelings of being withdrawn from the family, seemed to be very concerned with Trey. During the first appointment, we focused mostly on Trey's grief issues. He appeared to be withdrawn, slightly depressed after losing what appeared to be his best friend, witnessed his murder in their neighborhood. So we reviewed issues of grief with the family, spoke a lot about education, a lot about being accepting of grief issues, allowing Trey to grieve his own way, and working through this progressively and helping Trey deal with this in a healthy manner. We concluded that session and came back for next session in which we focused more on family history. During the second session, we were able to get more into the details of the family dynamic, and when certain issues began happening, it appeared at this time Reva was fairly upset with the family. She was doing fairly well and wanted Trey to come live with her at her home. After discussing the family dynamic and the issues occurring, we found that these issues began around age 10. Trey had been acting out at school, had several issues with peers, had been suspended, a few fights, things like that. And we noticed that, and Reva was dealing with working full time and being a full time mom, and was also going to school full time. And she was having issues with trying to deal with everything along with raising her son. So at that time, she gave custody to Furious, and we began to see kind of a unspoken family agreement to how they would change the dynamic. It appeared that Trey was dealing with some grief issues at that time, some fear of his environment, fear of violence, things like that. He was seeking a protector, which he felt he would have in his father. Reva at the time didn't have the time and energy to focus on everything and be a full-time mother. She felt that it would be best to give Trey to Furious, which allow her to go back to school and really focus more on her career. Furious, who was well respected in the community, was an advocate for his race and culture, seemed to relish in the fact of being a single father and getting that attention that single fathers typically get. So everybody in the family had benefited in some way, whether or not that was really discussed or spoken about at the time. However, what wasn't really spoken about at the time was Reva had a idea that once she was able to go back to school and complete her education, that she would return back to being the primary parent. This was never really agreed upon in the family, and that seems to stem where some of the issues are coming from now. Things seem to go fairly well for the family up until fairly recently, when Reva began to feel more left out in the family dynamic and started to push back and really wanted Trey to come stay with her. She felt by being successful, being out of the inner city and having a nice middle-class house, upper middle-class house, that she could provide for Trey and really be the protector that they were wanting for their son. However, this seemed to be fairly threatening for Furious, who had always been the protector and would be losing his role as the protector in the family unit. And this began to cause a struggle between the parents in which they would argue about who would take over custody of Trey. Caught in the middle of all this is Trey, who is torn between these two issues and the deep feelings of grief that he's having right now on top of that. So we concluded that session, and the next session I met solely with Trey. Trey and I discussed the issues that he was dealing with the feelings of grief, and really went back to when those feelings began. he began speaking about always having a fear of grief in his community, feeling threatened, fear of violence, things like that. That had really began to worsen as he got older, and had a few run-ins with police officers, one in which the officer actually threatened him after a violent altercation in the streets right before that. So at this time, he's feeling a real deep sense of hopelessness and loss of empowerment and a lot of fear related to his current situation in his community. So his mindset is that he really wants to get away as far as possible. So he's getting ready to enter into the launching phase, but it's not clear if he's really prepared. And on the other hand, he feels pulled by his parents to remain, and especially Reva, who's not prepared for him to enter into that launching phase. She feels left out in the family and isn't really prepared to allow Trey to go out on his own at this time. So we really discussed what that means for Trey and where he would like to be and what it's going to mean for him to actually launch into being an adult. So we concluded that session with an agreement to meet as a family and really discuss what that's going to look like for the family as they progress into the next stage of their family development. And that's where we're left at now. In the next session of our treatment, we're going to meet with the entire family, and we're going to really go over the launching phase. It's going to be really important in the next phase to open up communication between each family member so that each family member understands where they're coming from. It's going to be important for Trey to understand the concerns of his parents and him leaving on his own. It's going to be important for Reva to understand what Trey's feeling and why he feels pushed into launching away from the rest of the family. And for Fierce to understand why Reva is so set on having Trey live with her and her feelings of being left out in the family. So as we go through this, we're also going to focus on the grief and resiliency factors of the family. The family's been very resilient over the years in dealing with these types of issues and how they've come together when it's been very important for the entire family. And as we go along in this process, it's going to be important to incorporate Brandy into this entire situation so that she can really give her input, and she's going to be part of the launching phase as well, as it appears that she's going to be the primary person in Trey's life when she launches into the community. So the conclusion of treatment is going to finish once the entire family feels that they can make a consensus agreement on how the family is going to change, what that's going to mean for each member of the family, and ultimately what's going to be best for Trey as he launches into being an adult and being his own person in the community.